Kakashi is our cool dude. He's laid back and seems to put his friends before his missions, and his mentality of friends over missions is an inherited trait from his father and his teammate. It's the Kakashi that we all know and love. But the thing is, he wasn't always like this. Kakashi suffered a lot in the past, and that had caused him to reject love in preference to rules. Kakashi was scarred and hurt, and he didn't know how else to handle it. However, there was a possibility of Kakashi going rogue. After all, Kakashi's reactions were out of the realization that death could come from not following the rules. Love was lost when rules weren't followed. That's why he followed them. He blamed love. But what if instead Kakashi blamed rules? That's what I want to explore today. So sit right back and grab your closest mask. Let's get into it. But before we do, let me just say welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you're subscribed. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. A paper airplane flew past a mountain of white. Was it the ice-capped mountains of the land of snow? It might as well have been. The imagination of children was an incredible thing. But no, in reality this was no mountain, but the crazy yet stylish hair of Kakashi Hatake, a boy who was good at everything. A prodigy in his own right, with a heart filled with pride and love for his friends. Among his friends were Rin Nohara and Obito Uchiha. These two had known each other for quite some time. Rin had always had a crush on Itachi, and Itachi knew it, but he wasn't really interested in love at that time. As for Obito, he had a crush on Rin, which was all the beginning of a love triangle, except Kakashi was not planning to close that off with a crush of his own. Kakashi was content with just being their friend. And though Obito's one-sided contest for Rin's affection had turned them into rivals to a degree, there was a mutual friendship in there. Kakashi had pride, and that led to more than one scuffle between the two boys, but all the same, they were still friends enough to desire to hang out together. As Kakashi got his books together, he placed them in his pack, ready to head home. Today was another easy day at school. The answers were way too easy for him, and he was beginning to desire to finally graduate. He felt like he was being held back. Kakashi was the son of the great Sakumo Hatake, one of the 3 candidates for the role of Hokage. The only others who could stand up to anything Sakumo could do were Minato Namikaze and Fugaku Uchiha. These 3 warriors were the pride and joy of Konoha, or at least that's how it had been. Things weighed upon Kakashi's heart now, things to do with his father. Kakashi tried not to think about it though. All he could do was be there for his father during this time. Kakashi threw his backpack over his shoulder and began to head out the door. Some of the kids were waiting for their parents to pick them up, others were just enjoying their time getting to talk and loiter, and a few were gathering to go out on the town. As Kakashi stopped by his locker, he began to load it up with his backpack. Since there was no homework today, and Kakashi already knew everything there was to know in these textbooks, there was no reason to weigh himself down with it. He was getting tired, socially drained. The boring nature of the class he had just attended had made Kakashi crave some alone time. He was hoping to finally sneak off with his father's copy of Icha Icha. His father had done his best to hide his dirty obsessions from Kakashi, but the apple didn't fall far from the tree. The moment Kakashi knew what his father was reading, he too tried it out. From chapter 1, he was hooked. He needed to see how it ended. But as he stepped outside, he saw a few people waiting. They called to him. Kakashi looked up, witnessing the faces of the group. Obito, Rin, Guy, Asuma, and Kurenai. These 5 were waiting outside. "Hey, Kakashi, come on, we're going to the arcade." Kakashi shook his head. "Nah, I got something better to do today. I want to get home to it." Guy shook his head. "My eternal rival! How can you deny me the chance to prove myself against your impressive hand-eye coordination? We must have at least one spar in Virtua Fighter." Kakashi groaned and thought about it. "Come on, Kakashi, you can't just ignore that," Asuma said. "Your eternal rival's even putting on his puppy dog eyes for you." After hearing that, Guy immediately made his eyes as big and sparkly as he could while trying to squeeze out a tear. Kakashi had no defense against it. "I guess my book can wait. I can go play at least one game." So Kakashi and the others began making their way down the street. As he walked, Rin tried to stay close with him. Her face was a wide, toothy grin. As they kept going, she looked over and noticed some of the other villagers standing around talking. As they did, they looked in their direction with disgust, covering their mouths as they spoke, as if they thought they'd be inconspicuous. But nonetheless, Rin was not an overly confrontational girl. She didn't know why they were talking about their group, but she elected to ignore it. Getting to the arcade, they entered in and began to exchange some of their extra lunch money and allowance they had accrued and spent it on tokens for the game. Rin found herself playing Taiko no Tatsujin, with Obito quickly picking up the drumsticks to play against her. Not that he was any good at it. Having not even awakened his Sharingan yet, he showed a complete and utter lack of anything close to what one might call rhythm. As they beat the drums together, Kakashi and Guy were over there playing Virtua Fighter. Nearby, Asuma and Kurenai found themselves playing the only game that mattered, Galaga, a game of skill and timing, dodging and accuracy. This game was the superior game, and Asuma currently held the arcade's highest score in it. Something Kurenai had been double dog, triple dog dared to beat, and the worst part was she was already halfway there, having not even lost one of her fighters. As Asuma watched, he began to sweat. Suddenly, that's when the boss Galaga captured Kurenai's fighter. He smiled as he recognized her mistake. "Looks like you accidentally lost a ship," he said. Without so much as taking her eyes off the screen, Kurenai spoke. "Who said I did it by accident?" As the boss Galaga came down to attack, Kurenai used her fighter to destroy the boss, freeing her ship. Once more, Asuma began to sweat. Back at the Virtua Fighter booth, the announcer stated that Kagamaru had been named the victory. Kakashi jumped up and down as Guy slumped over the controls. "No hard feelings, Guy. You did well." Guy looked over. "Rematch. Best 2 out of 3 wins." Kakashi sighed. "Guy, I only came for one match. I can't keep going." "I bought your tokens. You gotta spend them with me." Kakashi rolled his eyes with a sigh. "I should just give you the tokens back." "Please, Kakashi. You can't leave me here without the chance to get back at you." Kakashi thought about it and finally relented. "Fine, but no more than 2 games." Those 2 games turned into 15. They were there for hours. Kakashi couldn't lie. He had started to have the time of his life. Eventually, he sat down. Looking over, he saw Guy buying more tokens. He had just declared best 16 out of 31. It was then that Rin sat down. She needed a break. Obito had been called away to watch what was becoming the all-time best Galaga competition in the village. It almost looked like one of the two might beat the world record. Every kid in the arcade was watching now. They were going at it marathon style. Asuma and Kurenai were already a good few hours into their run, and it seemed that if they didn't stop soon, somebody would inevitably cross the 20,980,450 point border and be forever remembered as one of the greatest players of all time. As Rin sat there, she looked over at Kakashi. "So, what's up?" Kakashi looked at Guy again. "I'm caught in an endless loop. He really should just choose a new game." Rin smiled at the comment. It was then that she looked over. Seeing the outline of his nose and lips and the gaiter he always wore over his face, Rin couldn't help but imagine making out with him. Perhaps that was embarrassing to say, but she was young, but reaching that age where girls began to grow interested in boys. An awkward phase indeed, but everyone had to go through it. That's when the question crossed her mind, something she just had to know. "Why do you always wear that mask?" she asked. Kakashi's eyes widened as if she had touched on something he found sensitive. He looked at her as she curiously awaited her answer. Kakashi spoke. "Why do you want to know?" Rin then began to explain. "Well, for as long as I've known you, you've always worn a mask. I've never actually seen what you look like under it. I'm left to imagine. Can you at least give me a hint?" Kakashi smiled. "A hint? A hint you want?" Rin nodded. "Just tell me what's under there?" Kakashi began to chuckle. "Well, I have massive lips and buck teeth, and a huge mole on the side of my chin." Rin looked at him skeptically. "I can't see your face, but I can at least discern enough from the shape of your face to know you're lying." Kakashi smiled and sat back. "Well, one of those things is true at least. I do have a small mole under the left corner of my mouth." Rin smiled at how adorable it might be to see. Her face softened. "You shouldn't be ashamed of it, Kakashi. In the world of fashion, people call those beauty marks. It just means you're very handsome." "Oh, I know. I don't mind it." "Then why do you hide your face?" Kakashi didn't want to talk about this one, but he assumed that he could trust her. "My father is Sakamo Hatake, one of the best Jonin to ever serve Konoha. He's a war hero who fought on the front lines of the Second Shinobi World War. Famed as the White Fang of Konoha, he made a name for himself on the battlefield. It's known that he has a massive price on his head from the Land of Wind, where he's infamous and feared. So you hide your face so people don't come for you to use you against him." Kakashi looked at her with a furrowed brow. "You really gotta let people finish talking." He shook his head. "Anyway, on one of his previous missions, he made a mistake. It cost a lot of people their lives, and ever since then, he's fallen out of favor in Konoha. He had me start wearing this mask to hide my identity so that his mistakes don't hurt my future." "That's horrible," Rin said as she realized why those people were whispering among themselves. "Your father made you start wearing a mask?" Kakashi nodded. He's very sensitive about what happened. The people are merciless though. They claim he's lost his honor and is a disgrace. While he could and should be the Hokage to replace Hiruzen, I fear he won't be, because everyone hates him now. As Kakashi thought about it more, he began to feel strange. Looking at the clock, he realized how late it was. Dang, I forgot to tell my dad I was staying out with my friends. I'm gonna get in trouble if I don't get home soon. He stood and began to head for the door. Guy turned around with obviously more coins for more than one game. Rival? Kakashi looked back. Let's put a pin in this guy. Make a record or something of all the times we've competed. We'll pick it up later. Guy's shoulders dropped. Pulling out a piece of paper, he began to write on it. Kakashi 15. Guy 0. Kakashi ran home. The sun had long since set. The moon was out already, and he was afraid that his father was going to be very upset with him for missing dinner. Making it home, he walked up to the front door. Removing his shoes before entering, he opened the door and stepped in. Dad, sorry I'm late. I was with friends and time got away. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw his father laying on the floor. He stepped in for a moment and stopped, just staring. Dad, you okay? He walked over to his father to check up on him when he saw a piece of paper wedged between his fingers. Picking it up, Kakashi began to read it. Dear Kakashi, I'm very sorry that it had to end this way. With everything that's happened, son, a lot's been weighing on my mind. I made a mistake that cost a lot of people their lives, but it wasn't on purpose. As the leader of the team, I had to make the decision to do what was best for my team, and maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. I thought with my heart instead of my brain, and now everything I've ever done, the legacy I've built, has just fallen apart. And worst of all, now that ruined legacy will fall upon you. If it were just me, I'd have been fine. I can handle the ire of the people, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about you, too. I don't want the people to hate you, or judge you based on my mistakes. You're strong, Kakashi. I knew that if anything ever happened to me, you would be okay. And so I decided to do the best I could for you, and purchase back your honor by paying for my mistake in the warrior's way. Harakiri, I hope that you... Kakashi couldn't read anymore. Eyes overrunning with tears, he knelt down and rolled his father over on his back. Sakamo was still clutching the dagger in his hands, the blade still perforating his stomach. Blood and bile had pooled under him and stained his clothes. His father still seemed to possess some warmth. He couldn't have been dead for more than an hour. That's when Kakashi realized it. If he had come home instead of going to the arcade, maybe his father would still be alive. Maybe there was a chance that Kakashi could explain it all to Sakamo and remind him how much he still needed him. But now it was too late. His father had made a rash decision which had cost him his life, all for something Kakashi didn't give a damn about. He didn't want to be Hokage. He didn't care if he had to wear a mask. He didn't care if people looked down on him. He would prove himself through his own achievements and successes, and would not be barred by any perceived failure on his father, as if he could consider anything he had done a failure. Sakamo had chosen his team over the mission, but the mission was doomed from the beginning, and everyone would have died if he hadn't attempted to save his team. Kakashi had seen his father make a good decision, but because the circumstances were bad, Konoha needed to find a way to pin the blame, and they used his father as a scapegoat, and now it had killed him. Kakashi, never being one to display his emotions, couldn't help but begin to cry. Looking at the letter again, he noted where it said, I knew that if anything happened to me, you'd be okay. He crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. I still needed you, he shouted at the unmoving, unflinching face of his father. How could you do this to me? His cries reached out toward the heavens. Why would you do this to me? He shouted. He cried, hyperventilating as he did so. Kakashi was a strong boy, but right now, the child in his heart, the child everyone has, the child every adult buries and pretends no longer exists, it dug itself out of the grave Kakashi had tried to hide it in and returned him to his earliest state, a state of tears, not unlike those of an irritated newborn, still emotionally recovering from the traumatic experience that is birth. And now it was a new traumatic experience he was facing. Off and on he cried and roared, sometimes stopping and entering a thought-heavy trance about everything he had ever experienced with his father. Thoughts about what future they could have had. Thoughts about how Kakashi might have stopped him, how he might have defended him. Between bouts of tears and screaming, he thought deeply about every possible universe where his father had not died, how Kakashi could have rescued him, how he could have helped him regain his honor. It was too late. Far too late. His father hadn't even gotten Kakashi's opinion, not that that would have mattered. After all, what would he have said? Hey son, just thought you should know that I decided to kill myself sometime soon. Hope you're okay with that. No, Sakamo knew Kakashi wouldn't want it, yet he did it anyway. Sakamoto had lied to himself, making him think that this would in no way affect Kakashi. No, it had more than affected him. It had destroyed him. All the pain, whatever hurt Sakamoto had felt that caused him to make this decision, all the depression, everything Kakashi was trying to help him carry, it was all on Kakashi now. Sakamoto probably thought that by ending his own life, he might spare Kakashi the painful life that Sakamoto was leading. But what Sakamoto didn't understand was that he didn't destroy the pain by killing himself. He had simply pushed it off onto Kakashi and then amplified it. Having lost all sense of time, Kakashi didn't even notice that a moment had even passed until he saw the first rays of sunlight shining through the window. The next day, he gathered himself and reported the death to the police force. Uchiha Shinobi stepped in and saw Kakashi covered in blood, his father laying upon the ground, a knife in his belly. They read the suicide note. It looked like a closed case, suicide. Despite that, there was a doubt among the investigators. While they couldn't prove it, they seemed to believe it was likely that Kakashi had staged this the whole time in an effort to regain the honor his father squandered in hopes of getting a higher position in Konoha's military and executive branches, and word of that began to get around. Gossip spread like a bad rash. Talk was cheap, and everyone was buying. As Kakashi went back to school for the first time since the event, he noticed so many people talking about him. More people than usual. Even the other students were. Rin sat there in her chair beside Obito. Kakashi had commonly sat near them, but today he was sitting far away from everyone. This was an attempt to be left alone. One of the kids behind them was whispering, "Psst, that Kakashi kid. My dad said that he killed his own father because he didn't want to deal with the shameful legacy Sakamoto left." The other kid whispered, "No way. They think it was staged? My dad says they don't have proof, but that it all lines up. That boy is likely guilty of patricide." Obito crumpled a piece of paper up, turned around, and threw it at the first boy. "Shut up. Your father's an idiot." The boy stood. "Says the murderer's best friend." Obito began to grapple with the boy, rolling down the steps. Kakashi knew what was happening, but didn't even look. Asuma caught the two rolling boys with the bottom of his foot. Lifting them up, peeled Obito and the other boy away from each other. "Enough, you two. People are trying to study here and learn how to serve their village well. If you can't respect that, then head outside." Obito began to explain. "This idiot's talking bad about Kakashi behind his back." Asuma grit his teeth. "And you thought that shouting that in Kakashi's presence was a good idea, Obito?" Obito covered his mouth and looked over to see Kakashi sitting there, not looking up from his textbook. Obito looked down. "I'm such a dweeb." Asuma then looked at the other. "You know what they say about loose lips, right?" The boy nervously responded to Asuma. "They sink ships?" Asuma shook his head. "No, they have a bad habit of getting cut off by the Hokage's son and shoved up your rear. Never let Kakashi's name pass between those lips again, or I'll pee in your Kool-Aid bottle the next time I see ya." He threw the boy back upstairs while dragging Obito back to his seat. Asuma found a seat and sat down, kicking up his feet on the desk. Kurenai entered thereafter and made her way silently to Asuma. Guy finally entered the room, where he put his hands on Kakashi's shoulder. "You know that I've experienced what you're going through right now. If you ever want to talk about it, I'm always open. And if you don't want to spend the night alone, know that my home is always open to you. After all, eternal rivals gotta stick together." Guy flashed his brightest smile at Kakashi. Kakashi looked up at it for a moment and then away. Guy made his way to his usual seat and sat down. Kakashi's grades for the day tanked completely. He didn't have the willpower to care much more than he was. As he finally got out of the academy, he decided to stop by Konoha Cemetery to talk to his father's grave, as if hoping he could somehow seek out advice. Coming to the freshly packed dirt where the grass had yet to begin growing again, he saw that someone had painted the words traitor on the headstone. Kakashi spent the next hour scrubbing it off, making it clean again. By that time, however, the sun was setting, and despite Kakashi's total and utter lack of appetite, he knew he needed to get something to eat. Touching his head to the headstone, he tried to reconnect with his father the same as he had before, but there was no connection. Sakamoto's time in Kakashi's life was over, and that wasn't something either of them could undo. Kakashi got up, went to the nearby store, and bought some food for supper. During that time, he heard people in the store around him whispering. Kakashi returned home only to find his front door vandalized as well. "Father Killer" was sprayed across it, along with the words patricide and murderer. Kakashi read it and looked away. Passing by, he entered his abode and begrudgingly made his food, his mind so far away that he didn't even know if he had fully cooked it, or maybe he had even burned it. He didn't really care. Slopping it into a bowl, he sat down at the table, having forgotten to get anything to drink, hardly caring if he choked and died. He pulled his mask down and attempted to eat, but as he did, the thoughts of everyone talking about him, the defacing of his father's headstone, as well as his house, caused tears to overflow from his eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of rage. Having hardly even started, he looked over and saw stains on the floor from where his father had died. Enraged, Kakashi stood, picked up his bowl and threw it at the wall, shattering the china and leaving broth and noodles stuck to the wall. Kakashi looked at it for a moment until his rage built up again. He flipped the entire table over and grabbed his chair, throwing it through the window. He roared in anger as loudly as he could. It was then that someone appeared in the doorway. Kakashi looked over and was frightened by the sudden appearance. Who are you?" The person smiled. "I've been waiting for you to get home." Suddenly, chains wrapped around Kakashi and pulled him into the darkness. The next morning, Rin Nohara left her house. It was another chilly morning. The clear skies and shining sun seemed to promise a day warmer than average, but despite that, Rin still wore a jacket for warmth. As she left her home, she began to make her way to the academy, but as she reached the crossroads, she started to think about it. Maybe Kakashi could use some company, she said as she began to make her way toward his house. As soon as she got there, she noticed the chair that sat outside the window. That's peculiar, she thought. Reaching the door, she read the front. Father killer. Her eyes widened. Oh no. She opened the door. Kakashi? She stepped in and looked around. She only saw the mess left behind. Tables flipped, chairs thrown, dishes smashed. The cabinet was already mostly pulled off the wall, and a small pot full of food was spilled on the ground, long since cooled and congealed. Kakashi, she called out. Did something happen, she wondered? Maybe this happened after he left. Maybe he's at the academy. She ran out the door. Despite her senses having known better, she ran toward the academy. As she entered, she saw the others there, but she didn't see Kakashi anywhere. Rin, what's wrong? Kurenai asked as she saw the look on her face. Rin's face was filled with terror. Guys, I can't find Kakashi. What do you mean? Asuma asked. Guy was already out of his chair. I went to his house and I saw destruction. I think he's been kidnapped. At about that moment, the homeroom teacher was entering the facility, but Asuma, Kurenai, Obito, Rin, and Guy all ran past. Where are they going? He asked, but no one answered. Rin led them to Kakashi's house. They began to investigate. The chair laid on the ground outside, and they too witnessed the door. Inside, the house was falling apart. If furniture within could be destroyed, it was. As they looked through, Obito spoke. Were they looking for something? Or were they ransacking the place? Asuma thought about it. He looked through the door and contemplated. Maybe the people who did this are other members of the village, Obito called out. Asuma shook his head. Nobody did anything against Kakashi and Sakamoto before. They could have been scared of Sakamoto, Obito said. Asuma looked over. I think somebody was scared of Sakamoto. As he looked at the paint on the door, he began to wonder. Sakamoto had enemies, and even if he were dead, those enemies would still want revenge. So Kakashi, living all by himself, would be a target. It's possible that this scrawling statement on the door is a red herring, designed to lead us away from the true culprits. It's possible that word of Sakamoto's death, as well as the public view about Kakashi's perceived involvement, have reached those enemies, who have scrawled this here as an attempt to distract us, to keep us from properly pursuing them. But then, who could be his real kidnapper, Rin asked. Asuma thought about it. The best person to ask would be my father. He would know. And so, Asuma and the others went to the Hokage's office, where they entered after knocking. As soon as the door opened, Hiruzen glanced up at them before returning his attention to the papers he was filling out. Shouldn't you five be in class right now? Yes, Dad, we should. But we have something very important come up, and we need to discuss it with you. Hiruzen finished writing out the sentence he was working on before sitting back in his chair. All right, what is it? Rin stepped forward. As I was headed to the academy today, I decided to stop by Kakashi's place to pick him up and walk with him to the academy. But when I got there, I found his home ransacked and vandalized. Asuma then began to speak again. Kakashi didn't come in for class today. We don't know where he is and we're worried. We're beginning to think he might have been kidnapped. Hiruzen nodded. Do you have any leads? Asuma shook his head. We believe that whoever did it is using the situation where everyone's accusing Kakashi of murder as a red herring to make us think that they're still in the village when it could very well be one of Sakamoto's enemies. Do you know who might want to do this? Hiruzen sat back and thought. Well, there are many I can think of, but the ones with the most hatred towards Sakamoto was always Tsunagankure. Asuma nodded and thought deeply on it. Do you think you can investigate it, Dad? Asuma asked. Hiruzen let out a sigh that he seemed to pinch off into a light hiss at the end. I can send people to investigate Kakashi's home, but without any hard evidence that it really was Suna, I can't exactly send any shinobi to go look for him. The children seemed a bit disappointed by this. It could be that Kakashi isn't even kidnapped at all. Maybe he came home, saw the message, threw a fit, and went somewhere else in the village to cool off. I'm sure he'll turn up. It would take a lot of effort to be able to sneak past our village's security. So you kids just return to class and be sure to give the teacher this. Hiruzen gave them a slip to say that they were doing official Konoha business. That should at least clear up any discipline you might face. Now get. He shooed them out of his office. Asuma and the others returned to class where they finished their day. As the day ended, they decided to head out and search for Kakashi. As they did, they checked back at his house to see it was currently being investigated by the Konoha intelligence team. They would then check everywhere they thought Kakashi might go. The park, the pond, the arcade, the cemetery. Nowhere they went seemed to turn over anything that would lead them to where Kakashi had been taken. As the day came to a close and everyone began to get ready to head home, Asuma spoke. I still can't shake the feeling that something happened. Kakashi isn't in the village anymore. I just know, he said. Anyone else get that feeling? Rin nodded. Something just doesn't seem right. Kakashi isn't the type of guy to just disappear without a trace. Someone must have gotten to him. So what should we do about it? Obito asked. I'm going after him, Guy said. If Kakashi was taken to Suna, then I'll go there myself and bring him back. Are you crazy? We're just 5 kids. You think we'd be able to do it? Besides, you heard Hiruzen. He said that without proof he can't send any shinobi to Suna or it might cause another war. Asuma thought about it. I think that's exactly why we should go, he said. You see, we're not shinobi at all. I think it's because we're children that we can do this. Nobody expects that a bunch of pre-Genin kids would ever do anything that could launch a war against Suna. Since we're not even officially registered as shinobi, that makes us private citizens, completely separated from Konoha's military activity. That may be true, Asuma, Kurenai said, but we can't forget to factor in experience. We are all still in the academy because we're inexperienced, not ready to become shinobi. What happens if we go and get captured? You're the Hokage's son. They'll hold you hostage to get something from Konoha. Asuma looked down, understanding what Kurenai was saying. So what are we supposed to do? Just abandon Kakashi? I won't do it. Kurenai shook her head. No, I'm not saying that we don't do it. My father knows a guy who was recently retired from active service under Konoha. He sometimes does work secretly for them. He's the perfect shinobi to help us do this. And you think you can get him to join us? Asuma asked. Kurenai shook her head. I can't, but I think you can. The next day, Kurenai led them to a pub. Entering, she led them deeper to a table and sat down. Allow me to introduce you to Asuma Sarutobi, the son of Hiruzen Sarutobi, she said. Asuma sat down as well. To whom do I have the honor of speaking, he asked. The man smiled as he leaned into the light. The name's Jiraiya. How can I be of service to ya? And that's where I think I'm gonna stop it for now. I always did like to leave you all on a cliffhanger. So, what did you think of the video? Be sure to leave a comment and ask us. As I wrote this story, I couldn't help but think of the tragedy of Sakamoto Hatake. You see, harakiri was a ritual undertaken by disgraced warriors, and it lasted as something commonly done in Japan all the way up to the end of World War II. It was a tragic practice to be undertaken, and remains as just another facet of an epidemic of the heart that happens all too often in our society these days. A lot of people are in a dark place, and feel that there's only one way out, but I promise you that that's not true. If you or a loved one has or is having thoughts about that, please contact the proper healthcare specialists. We here at the Amagi care about you and your families. We want to see you happy and healthy. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more videos like this drop. And until next time, peace.